Yes, that's right. She has been arrested in Brussels for holding up a sign. It's a worrying culture at the heart of the European Union. I'm Emma Trimble, and this is GBN Originals. Before we get stuck into it, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Now, I'm delighted to say that I am joined by Lois McLatchie Miller from ADF International, who has just been arrested. Yes, that's right. She has been arrested in Brussels for holding up a sign alongside another guy who many people might be familiar with, Billboard Chris Elston, who goes around with these big billboards on him just in order to have conversations with people in public places. So, Lois, tell us what happened.
Well, Chris and I came to Brussels to share one of the most important messages of our day, that children cannot consent to puberty blockers, and no child has ever been born in the wrong body. They need love and affirmation in the skin that they're in. So obviously this is a very critical message for our era, and we were here meeting politicians, members of the European Parliament, who were very interested to hear from Chris's research, etc. And we also spent some time having street interviews and getting this word out amongst the population of Brussels. We went out yesterday afternoon. We'd barely been there 15, 20 minutes when some quite violent, angry men came. They were particularly harassing me, trying to mess with the equipment, pushing me back a little bit, shouting in my face. We ended up having to call the police because more and more people came and surrounded us as quite a violent mob. We didn't know if it was going to descend into something quite unsafe. So we actually called the police for our own safety. When the police showed up, they took a look at the scenario. They saw the messages written on our boards, and instead of arresting those that were being aggressive and harassing us, they arrested us instead.
So they had no reason to do this. You didn't need a permit to be out there in public. You called the police yourself for your own safety. And rather than protecting your rights to freedom of speech in the capital of the European Union, they chose instead to target the victim and to put you in a cell for seemingly no reason, because they didn't charge you. They just kept you in a cell for a few hours and then let you go.
That's right. Yeah, so they claimed that we were holding a demonstration, but as I explained to them several times, it was no demonstration. It would have been pretty pathetic if we were with just two people. Chris travels around the world having these conversations. They're street interviews. This is quite a common social media practice. Lots of influencers do this, engaging with people with different opinions, showing kind of what the world might think about an issue. And that's what we were there to do. That's what Chris has always done, just having conversations. And so you don't need a permit to have conversations, as I said to the police officer, if we were talking about climate change or Israel and Gaza or on any of these issues. They wouldn't, ask us to ask permission to talk about such an issue. But it seemed that because we were speaking about the dangers of puberty blockers and how they are impacting kids across the globe, that seemed to have a different response from Belgian police. And they threatened at first to give us a criminal charge. And then by the end of our time in cells, it seems that had been waved away and we were able to walk free.
But even if you had been demonstrating, that wouldn't have been against the law. So how did they justify it to you when they arrested you? Did they read you your rights? Did you, have an understanding of why it was that they were choosing to arrest you rather than to choose those who were trying to physically intimidate you?
It was quite complex to follow, to be honest. It wasn't a very clean arrest. We were told initially that this was about not having a permit to have a demonstration. And we were told we could either go away and take our boards off, or we could get in the police car. Now, by this time, there was a lot of people surrounding us, yelling, screaming, really quite violent things. To have given up on our message at that moment would have really represented something that I didn't want to do. If you can't speak the truth in the face of hostility, you never will. And it would have really been a victory it would have been a victory for censorship. It would have been a victory for this horrible ideology that says that kids should maim and sterilize themselves at an age where they have no idea what they're doing. So it wouldn't have been right at that point to give up. And we wanted to protect our rights to free speech. And so we got into the police car. We went to the station, we were handcuffed, and we were told at that point that we were arrested. And we were told we were going to be charged with disturbing the peace. We were quite surprised at that point. That had never been communicated to us before. We didn't know we were being faced with any criminal charge. Again, we had really just called for our own safety. But yes, as I said, later on, it seemed that this criminal charge was dropped and it turned into an administrative, we said we might receive an administrative fine, but then the time that we left, we didn't even have a fine anymore. We were just free to go.
So you obviously work for ADF International. You're involved in legal advocacy for people who end up in situations like this. I know from the videos that Billboard Chris put out just after your arrest, he said that he was, made to strip down to his underwear. Do you feel that you have a case against them here, that your right to freedom of speech has been seriously violated by this, that you were wrongly detained for the hours that you were kept in those police cells? Do you feel that, maybe you've spoken to some of your colleagues already about this, that the process of arresting you and keeping you detained for that period of time is just not the way that things are supposed to be done, even under Belgian law?
We do have a team looking into it right now, partnered with some Belgian lawyers, to look at what happened and if things, if our rights were violated. I certainly feel like they might have been. There's also a few incidents that happened along the way. I wasn't quite sure if they asked us to turn our cameras off when we were just speaking to police, and even moved our camera away. But I do think that it is a citizen's right to be able to record those important conversations for both parties, and to keep a documentation of everything that the police are saying in that important scenario. So there's quite a few things that happened along the way that I'd like to just check out. And so we have some lawyers looking into that right now.
Yeah, well, whether it is the law in Belgium or not, it would seem that JD Vance was in fact right.
Some may say, indeed. No, it's the capital of the EU. JD Vance very correctly pointed out that the threat to Europe comes from within, from this culture of censorship and shutting down important conversations. And here we are at Europe's capital. We literally spent the morning meeting politicians who welcomed us into the parliament, and then out on the streets, it was the police who shut our conversation down. So I think it is quite a symbolic arrest. And really exposes the free speech crisis in Europe. If we can't speak out to protect kids, to raise concerns about protecting children, what can you speak out about?
And have any of those politicians come out in your support after having met with you? You would have thought the police would have taken that into account, the fact that you're obviously meeting with some quite senior, high-level political figures while you're out there in Brussels, that it might not necessarily be the best optics to lock you in a police cell for a couple of hours. Did any of those politicians speak out about it? Maybe there would have been political costs if they did?
Well, several have reached out to us and are looking into giving statements, etc. And we have had support from around the world, really. It was very heartening to get out. You lose your phone when you get arrested, so you have no idea if anyone even knows. Chris just managed to get the video out. So we thought some people might have noticed, but I had no idea, if my own husband knew where I was or my friends and family knew. But when we were released from jail hours later, it was very heartening to see around the world politicians, but also members of the public, tweeting, messaging us on all sorts of social media platforms to say that they stood with our rights. Many agreed with us and said it's egregious what they're doing to kids and we must talk about it. Some disagreed with us, but thought it was horrific to see such an authoritarian measure taken in Europe's capital, and that, of course, we should be allowed to have conversations in the streets. So that's heartening, and hopefully that culture shift is true, that people are waking up to this free speech crisis, that people are waking up to that reality that these conversations are being shut down. And if it changes on the ground, then we can change it in politics too.
And this sort of way of policing, where the police choose to side with the potential victim rather than actually dealing with the people who are trampling all over their rights, this is not something that is limited to this instance. We've seen plenty of examples of that here in the UK as well. Is that something that you're very au fait with from your own work? It must have been quite an interesting situation to be able to see that kind of policing from the inside.
Yeah, it was very interesting to see and to experience it. But and a lot of people have reached out to ask if I was scared, but actually I knew, and I was very grateful for my experience at ADF International, because I've seen incredible people who've been through this kind of censorship and having only even prayed in their head or held a sign saying here to talk if you want, or saying And I knew that I was in the right because our message was fine. What we were doing was fine. I was really confident that we had not broken any laws. And in fact, we were doing a good and right thing. And so that gave a lot of comfort and peace in the context. But yeah, no, it can really happen to anyone who is bold enough to have, a conversation that might seem unpopular at times. It can come for anyone at this point.
Although Chris probably has dozens more of those billboards, they did take them, and I think you were informed that they had been sent to be destroyed.
Yes.
So they also chose to destroy your property despite the fact that you weren't charged with anything.
Yes, and I'd like to kind of look into that as well. The signs are not cheap, and they took 3 of them. That's about, I think almost over $200 worth of signs of property. It's not just cardboard, and it takes a lot of work. And even if they had been cardboard, it's still a piece of property from people who have been decidedly not involved in criminal activity. They did not charge us, and yet they still think our message should be withheld. Now there are plenty more signs where that come from. It's not going to shut Chris up, but the symbolism again, that they should take away these words and hide them from the public is really telling.
And was there no point during this entire ordeal where it looked as if they might actually arrest the people who were harassing you? Because you were the ones who called the police. So you had already informed the police that these people were physically intimidating you. Was there no point at which it looked as if they might arrest the mob rather than you?
Honestly, no. I mean, they went over and took statements. I pointed out the 2 men who had been very physically overpowering to me, and they never physically assaulted me, but it certainly seemed that they could, and were shouting in my face quite aggressively using all manner of colorful language. I pointed these people out that I had felt threatened, abused, alarmed, distressed, and yet this doesn't seem to, as far as we know, there was no further action taken against. And I did kind of encourage the police officer at one point, as he was kind of coming to the end and it was clear that he was going to arrest us. I said, look around. Do you really think that we're the bad guys here? We had this whole mob that the police were holding back. They formed a huge circle around us. A lot of the mob, somehow, I don't know how they coordinated this, or if it was even just a figment of my mind. A lot of them seemed to be wearing black. And it just looked so threatening. I said, do you really think we're the bad guys here? And he kind of shrugged. And he was just doing his job. But the optics,
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that color coordination. Did it seem to you as if it might actually have been a coordinated response? Had you been doing this in Brussels for a couple of days already? Was it possible that maybe this could have been a kind of activist group who was intentionally coming out to try and stop you from being able to have these conversations? Or while you were out having these conversations, were some people actually, quite forthcoming and wanting to talk with you? Because, Chris does this. He does this all around the world, and he has these conversations with people. And this seems to be an unusually hostile situation, even by his standards.
Yeah, it was unusually hostile. I've been out in a few countries with Chris now, in Australia, across different cities in Australia, which is considered to be a very woke country, and in Vienna, in Geneva. And normally in any country, Chris has about 9-to-1 support. That doesn't mean everybody comes up for a conversation, but the majority of people will either walk past and give a thumbs up, or say well done, or I agree with you, I support you. Normally, especially from men, from dads, from parents, you often get a lot of support. But in Brussels, it really was flipped the other way around. We've never seen something as hostile as this. And everywhere we went in Brussels, it was about 5-to-1 against. So it's obviously this is Europe's capital. A lot of people are here because they're paid to promote certain values. So it's not the average man in the street, you might say. But yeah, there certainly could have been some coordination. I think some of them had been brought together by a group. Others, just saw what was going on and joined in. So it's hard to tell, how much coordination was put in. But it's certainly all mounted up to quite a threatening scene. So I think that will stay with me for the rest of my life, probably.
It's a worrying culture at the heart of the European Union. But there are obviously people who were within the sort of political system. They're willing to meet with you and wanting to talk to you about these issues and supportive of what you're doing. What is the sort of motivation for you to be so confident in being willing to actually be arrested, that you think this issue is so fundamentally important that, as you say, you're not demonstrating, you're not out there with a placard protesting. What you are standing for is the right to have conversations about these important issues. So what is it about this particular issue and talking about this political issue that is so important to you that you're willing to get arrested for it?
And kids are being harmed across the world. There's a social contagion amongst teenage girls, largely impacting autistic teenage girls. These are vulnerable little kids. I mean, anyone who can think a child that's not old enough to decide what they want for breakfast can then make a decision about facing lifelong infertility, increased risk of heart problems, bone density structure, decisions impacting their physiology and health for the rest of their lives. Often a social contagion being taught in schools and pushed through media. This is one of the most important issues of our day. It's just a child's rights abuse, child's abuse story of the century, really, putting kids in harm's way just for the sake of an ideology. Kids can't change gender. They should be loved and affirmed, actually feel confident in the bodies that they are born in. We can't ignore it. If we ignore it, then we're weak adults and we're not protecting the most vulnerable in society.
And your views on this are informed, I'm assuming, are formed by your Christianity. I don't know whether Chris is also religious, but do you find, in your advocacy for this, that a lot of those people who are perhaps most sympathetic to your view are also coming from a Christian perspective?
It's a mix, yeah. So I'm a Christian. Chris is not. So we both are very confident in our views, not only because of my faith, but also because of the evidence. So we can see the evidential basis for the harms that puberty blockers, hormone therapies, and dangerous surgeries can cause to kids. And it's also just basic common sense that all of us knew until 5 minutes ago. So I think it unites a lot of people. You really get a variety of individuals who think it's wrong to harm, maim, and sterilize children, unsurprisingly. And it's been I think it's been helpful to see that movement come together from across different backgrounds, whether it's the Christians who also obviously want to protect and uphold the dignity of every human being just they are created, or whether it's more of the turf movement who are seeing the damage of this further down the road and the way that it impacts women's rights and the woman's place in society, or parents largely, whatever their background, want to protect their children from what they can see as a harmful ideology. So it really is a strong alliance across, really at the moment now, across right and left. And I hope that can give further momentum to this common sense movement.
Do you think the tide is turning, well, here in the UK, but perhaps also maybe in Brussels, the fact that there are people who are willing to meet with you, presumably wanting to do something about this issue from within the European political system? Do you think that that this ideological, as you were saying, is sort of the way in which it's spreading? I don't want to use the term infecting our political scene, that there is this kind of contagion. Do you think that has already seen its peak, and that we're now sort of moving on politically away from that people are starting to recognize that the things that we knew were true only 5 minutes ago, that this is just a sort of blip?
Nobody can deny is that it's a winning issue politically. This issue really determined the US election results. If you look at kind of which campaigns did the best, it was those that stood up for children against this ideology. Certainly in the UK, politicians have realized that. I think it's pretty clear that this common sense logic has won, at least in the kind of political bubble, and we need to make sure that trickles down into what's pushed out in schools and the media as well. But I think the momentum is with us. In Brussels, we did get to meet with members of the European Parliament. None of them were Belgian, and none of them were democratic bubble in terms of civil servants or that kind of equivalent in these big behemoth institutions. So I think that is a little bit of a difference, obviously, between a parliamentarian who has influence and in the system that can put the wheels on a lot of this ideology and set it into motion. So I think, getting this getting these facts, these medical-based evidence into the hands of those who work in institutions is really critical. And we see that when people do see the truth and people do recognize what's going on, they do stand up for children. Even in Scotland, my own country, one of the more liberal-leaning countries in the world, under an SNP government, under Hamza Yousaf, puberty blockers were banned, and under the Labour government in the UK, they followed suit as well. And so it's no longer just a right-wing talking point. This is medical-based. This is fact-based, and you can't ignore the mountain of evidence that has come out against these dangerous procedures. We must uphold our children's rights to their own puberty, the rights to their own body, and the right to feel confident in their own skin.
I saw that your husband, Callum, tweeted saying this is tyranny. From your experience of working with ADF, have you, do you feel that actually free speech is in a serious crisis across the Western world, not just on this issue, but in general?
Yes, of course. I mean, we see it across the entire world. And as ADF International, we have this global perspective, which I think is really helpful. We have lawyers that we're partnered with in Nigeria and Pakistan who are defending Christians who have upset a Muslim blasphemy law and will be on death row for several years. And that's all we say. We can all get behind that and say, what a terrible crisis of free speech and freedom of belief they have there. But then we look across to Europe and we have Päivi Räsänen, a politician in Finland who just tweeted a Bible verse tweet in 2019 and is on criminal trial at the Finnish Supreme Court under a charge of hate speech filed under severe charges in the criminal code for what she tweeted. In Mexico, we have similar situations. In the UK, people being arrested and criminally convicted for prayers in their head near abortion facilities. So you can see how across the world, the names of these laws might be different. And the East, it might be called a blasphemy law, and the West, it might be called a hate speech law. But fundamentally, they are the same thing. They censor and say that you cannot speak against the dominant thought of the day, the dominant religious idea, the dominant societal idea. You can't speak out against the authority's idea of what's true. And whenever that happens, that's incredibly dangerous. It's much more democratic. It's the fundamental principle of democracy and of free speech and of human rights that every citizen should be allowed to discuss their ideas, to challenge those in society. And as nature works, the bad ideas will get flushed out and the good ideas will rise. And so we must be able to live like that.
And obviously, not everybody's made to be a martyr to these sorts of things. And a lot of people would look at your sort of bravery in being arrested and really admire you for your strength and your willingness to put yourself out there and your willingness to be arrested for the cause of freedom of speech. What message do you have for people who might be watching this video, who might feel that, they're cowed by the fact that they, perhaps feel that they can't have these conversations? Do you have a message for them to perhaps, encourage similar courage?
Well, I think we can be encouraged by the fact that we weren't charged in the end because we weren't doing anything wrong. And there are victories every day across the UK and across Europe that we don't even necessarily hear about because they don't make the news every day. But we do have fundamental rights to free speech. The law can protect us. And the only way that we erode or lose that right is by not using it. And so, I always encourage everybody to engage in both grace and truth. There's no point in using your free speech if it's going to be ineffective. So you want to make sure your message is winsome and helpful. But if it is so, and then you have every right to be engaging in these conversations. But most importantly, on these issues which impact, whether that's life in the womb, from all the way up through kindergarten, childhood, and puberty. These are the most vulnerable citizens that we have. And if we cannot speak out to protect their rights and their safety, then we're absolute cowards. So I think be encouraged by the legal wins that we see, whether that's Maya Forstater or the great Supreme Court victory recently where truth was upheld. And we could be, if we're speaking the truth in grace, then we can feel confident about what we say.
Inspiring note to end on. Thank you, Lois McLatchie Miller from ADF International. Just got arrested in Brussels, but is doing just fine. Didn't get charged with anything. Thank you so much again, Lois. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let us know what you think in the comments. Thank you for watching.